The moment she refused to kneel, the village gasped, not because they feared punishment, but because everyone suddenly remembered who she used to be. Guards moved forward. The king raised his hand. He remembered her too late. By the time the royal drums echoed from the far end of Ajanaku village, people were already adjusting their bodies. Backs straightened, wrappers were tightened, children were yanked indoors by wrists that trembled more than they meant to show. "Come down," a woman whispered to her husband, tugging his sleeve as if gravity itself had become dangerous. Today was not a day to be seen standing. The king was coming. Dust rose before him, red and thick, kicked up by feet that never touched the ground. His carriers moved in perfect rhythm, practiced and tireless, as if the throne had trained their bones. Above him hovered the ceremonial umbrella, woven gold and deep indigo, wide enough to shade authority itself. Power liked drama. It believed people respected what arrived loudly. The drums stopped. They always did. Not because someone ordered them to, but because even sound understood hierarchy here. The king's feet touched the earth, and the village collapsed. Men dropped to one knee in near-perfect unison. Elderly women folded slowly, carefully, as though their joints were negotiating old truces with pain. Younger women knelt fully, palms pressed to the ground, foreheads lowered, backs curved into the familiar shape of survival. Respect, they called it. Fear, wearing good manners. A child hesitated, too young to know better, and his mother forced him down so fast his chin scraped the earth. He did not cry. Crying attracted attention. The king smiled. It was the smile of a man who had grown used to this moment, the soft sigh of a crowd surrendering its height. Then someone noticed. At first it was only confusion. A flicker of something wrong that couldn't yet be named. Eyes darted sideways, quickly, guiltily, like thieves caught mid-thought. Someone was still standing. Morẹ. She stood alone near the edge of the square, not positioned dramatically, not seeking an audience. Her feet were planted evenly on the red earth, her arms relaxed at her side, her spine straight in a way that did not beg to be noticed. But it was noticed. A gasp rippled through the kneeling crowd, not loud, not singular, but collective. The sound of people realizing something dangerous had just happened in their presence. "Is she mad?" someone breathed. No, she must not have heard, another whispered, already knowing that wasn't true. Morẹ had heard. She had heard the drums. She had seen the dust. She had felt the shift in the air when power arrived. And still she did not kneel. The guards reacted instantly. Hands tightened on spear shafts. Sandals scraped softly as two of them stepped forward, trained to move before thought. Their eyes locked onto her with the flatness of men who did not need reasons, only permission. The square held its breath. The king noticed now. At first, irritation flickered across his face, a reflex. Disobedience always annoyed him, not because it threatened him, but because it interrupted expectation. He leaned forward slightly. "Who is that?" he asked, his voice calm, curious, dangerous. No one answered. Eyes dropped lower, heads bowed further. Silence rushed in to protect itself. The guards moved another step closer. Morẹ did not move. Her heart was steady. Not because she was brave, but because fear had exhausted itself in her long ago. It had taken everything it could and found nothing left worth stealing. The king lifted his hand. The guards froze. That was when it happened. Not loudly, not suddenly, a memory stirred. Something about the way she stood, not defiant, not pleading. Something about the stillness in her posture, the familiarity of a woman who once occupied rooms where voices mattered. His gaze sharpened. He looked again. Really looked. The lines on her face told stories grief had written carefully. Her eyes held no challenge but no apology either. They were eyes that had finished begging life for fairness. And then, like a delayed drumbeat, recognition struck him in the chest. Morẹ, nikẹ. The woman did not kneel because she could not. She did not kneel because she already had, too many times for too many injustices that had worn the name of authority. The king's raised hand trembled. Around them, the village waited, for punishment, for mercy, for spectacle. But what unfolded instead was far more dangerous. The king remembered her, and he remembered himself. Too late. Before the village learned to whisper her name, Morẹ nikẹ was known for something else. Clarity. Not beauty, though she had that in the unbothered way some people do. Not wealth, though her father's compound was one of the largest in Ajanaku. What people remembered, if they were honest, was the way her presence settled a room. When Morẹ nikẹ entered a gathering, arguments softened, not because she demanded attention, but because she listened as though words mattered. Her name meant, I have someone to care for me. It was given with confidence, not hope. Her father, Baba Adebowale, was the king's advisor back when the throne still pretended to seek counsel. He was a careful man, slow to speak, slower to flatter. He believed wisdom was a communal responsibility, not a royal possession. Morẹ nikẹ grew up at the edges of power, close enough to observe but never groomed to rule. She learned early that authority did not need volume, that the loudest voice in a room was often the least certain. As a girl, she asked inconvenient questions. Why must the women leave when decisions are made? What happens if the king is wrong? Who watches the people who watch us? The elders laughed indulgently. The king smiled and called her clever. No one thought the questions dangerous because she was young and because they believed time would sand her edges smooth. It never did. She married a quinoa during the season of early rains, when the earth smelled like new beginnings. He was not powerful, not wealthy, but he was principled in a way that made shortcuts uncomfortable. They were partners in the truest sense, arguing late into the night, sharing ideas as easily as meals. Their compound became a quiet meeting place for people who still believed discussion could solve what force could not. That was when the village still came to Morẹ nikẹ. Not publicly, quietly. A woman unsure about a marriage. A man torn between silence and truth. An elder afraid of what power was becoming. Morẹ nikẹ listened. She never promised solutions, only honesty. And honesty in a changing village became dangerous. It began with land. Not ordinary land, not farmland anyone could casually dismiss. This was ancestral land, the kind measured not in acres, but in memory. Land Morẹ nikẹ's family had guarded long before the throne learned to call itself permanent. Then one morning, it moved. Just slightly. Enough to change everything. Akinwale noticed first. He was not looking for trouble. He was looking for numbers, records that refused to align, levies that disappeared between announcement and collection. He followed the paper trail the way honest men do, slowly, methodically, trusting that truth would reward patience. Instead, it punished curiosity. He discovered the land had been quietly reassigned to the palace. No announcement, no meeting, no compensation, just a signature, added after midnight, justified as development planning. Akinwal brought the documents home that night. Morẹ remembered how careful he was with them, how he washed his hands before touching the paper, as if truth required cleanliness. He spoke softly, but his eyes were burning. "This is theft," he said simply. "Not corruption. Not politics. Theft." They knew what it meant to say that word aloud. Still, Akinwale believed in process. He believed the king had not seen the full picture, that someone lower had abused power. Morẹ wanted to believe that too. The meeting was arranged quickly, too quickly. No witnesses, no elders present, just Akinwale, a palace official, and a promise that the matter would be handled. He never returned. By morning, the village already knew the story. He had slipped near the river. The current was strong. These things happen. The body was recovered with unsettling speed. The burial followed before questions could gather momentum. Morẹ noticed the details no one wanted to discuss. The missing documents. The bruise behind his ear. The way the boundary stone had already been moved further by the time condolences ended. The investigation was brief. Too brief. Morẹ knew then, before the burial, before the condolences, before the food arrived, that her voice had been noticed and marked. Widowhood wrapped around her like a second skin. Suddenly she was expected to disappear gently, to grieve quietly, to remember less. Her father's health declined shortly after. Some said grief, others said stress. His seat near the throne was never filled again. The village adjusted without ceremony. Silence did not arrive suddenly. It trained her patiently. But something important survived. Her posture. Even in grief, Morẹ did not fold inward. She did not hunch to apologize for existing. She walked slowly, deliberately, as if each step still mattered, even when no one acknowledged it. Years passed. The village forgot who she had been. So when she stood in the square while everyone else knelt, it wasn't courage summoned in a moment. It was muscle memory. She had once occupied spaces where standing upright was normal. And silence, no matter how thorough, had never erased that memory. The drums had stopped. The praise singers froze mid-chant. Even the wind seemed to hesitate, unsure whose side it was on. Morẹ still stood. One woman, one spine unbent. One mistake if you asked anyone brave enough to whisper. The chief guard moved first. Not because he was eager, but because hesitation is dangerous when authority is watching. His sandals scraped against the earth as he stepped forward, spear angled just enough to suggest possibility. The second guard followed, then the third. A formation born from training, not instinct. The message was clear. This does not end well. People lowered their heads instinctively, as if avoiding eye contact might erase responsibility. Someone tugged at Morẹ's wrapper from behind. "Kneel," a woman hissed, panic trembling in her voice. "Please." Morẹ did not turn. Not because she was proud, because she was finished pretending. The guards stopped a few paces away, close enough now for her to smell dust and metal, close enough for force to become personal. The chief guard cleared his throat. "Woman," he said, voice measured, official, "do you not see the king?" Morẹ finally spoke. "I see him." Her voice was steady, not loud, not soft, just unafraid. A ripple passed through the crowd. That tone unsettled them more than shouting ever could. It carried something dangerous, certainty. "You will kneel," the guard said. "It is custom." "Custom," she replied, "is not the same as justice." The word justice landed badly, like a stone dropped into sacred water. The king shifted on his throne. Just slightly. Enough. Everyone noticed. The guards hesitated. The chief guard glanced back towards the throne, seeking permission that had not yet been spoken. His hand tightened around his spear, muscles prepared for instruction. If the king nodded, even once, it would be over. Morẹ knew that. She also knew something else. This moment was no longer about her safety. It was about memory. She took one step forward. The crowd gasped. Not because the movement was aggressive, but because it was deliberate. Because no one steps toward power unless they have already accepted the cost. "I will not kneel," she said, now loud enough for the square to hear, "before a throne that never stood for me." A murmur rose, shocked, offended, afraid. The guards raised their spears instinctively. And then, the king raised his hand. The gesture was small, but it froze everything. Spears halted mid-air, guards locked in place. The crowd collectively exhaled a breath it had been holding. The king's eyes were fixed on Morẹ now. Not with anger, with confusion, with something stirring beneath layers of ceremony and years of unchallenged obedience. Morẹ did not rush her words. She understood something the crowd did not, that once truth is spoken, it cannot be taken back, so she let it arrive slowly the way dawn does. Unstoppable, quietly humiliating to darkness. "I know why you are looking at me that way," she said. Her voice carried, not because it was loud, but because the square had given it room. Even the guards seemed to lean in without meaning to. "You are trying to remember where you have seen me before." The king's brow furrowed. She nodded gently as if encouraging him. "You will not find me in your victories," she continued, "or your festivals, or your praise songs." A pause. "You will find me in what was never addressed." The crowd shifted uneasily. People exchanged looks. Some already knew where this was going and wished it would stop. Morẹ did not look at them. She looked only at the king. "My name is Morẹ Akinwala." The name struck the air like a key turning. The king inhaled sharply. Just once. A sound so small yet so revealing, it travelled faster than any drumbeat ever could. "You took land from my husband," she said evenly. "Not through war, not through judgment, through silence." A murmur rippled. She raised one hand, not in accusation but in remembrance. "He came to your palace believing process still mattered. He believed truth could still reach the throne without punishment." Her voice did not crack. That terrified people more than tears ever could. "He never came home." Someone sobbed quietly in the crowd. The king's hand tightened on the armrest. "You were told he slipped," Morẹ went on. "That accidents happen. That authority had nothing to explain." She tilted her head slightly. "So I learned something that day." Silence pressed in. "I learned that justice here is selective, that kneeling is required only from those who have already lost." The guards stood frozen. No command came, no interruption. Morẹ took a breath. "I did not stand today to embarrass you," she said. "I stood because I knelt for years in private. I knelt to grief, I knelt to fear, I knelt to survival." Her eyes never left the king's. But I will not kneel again before a throne that could not even acknowledge the cost of its own silence. The square felt smaller now, more intimate, more dangerous. The king looked at her, really looked this time, not as a subject, not as a woman out of place, as a consequence. Memory finished assembling itself behind his eyes. The land, the complaint, the man who asked too carefully. Morẹ nikẹ lowered her hand. I am not asking for punishment, she said softly. I am not asking for restoration. A pause. I am asking you to remember. Out loud. No one moved. The king said nothing, but he did not raise his hand again. And that, more than any decree, changed the village forever. Because everyone there understood something at last. Power survives noise. It fears memory. And one woman standing quietly had made forgetting impossible. Nothing happened immediately. That was the first lesson. No proclamations were announced. No land was returned in a dramatic ceremony. Life in Ajanaku resumed the way it always had, slowly, cautiously, pretending nothing had shifted. But pretending became harder. People noticed small things first. The guards no longer barked commands with the same confidence. Their authority remained, but it hesitated, like a man who had seen himself in a mirror and did not like the reflection. The elders spoke more carefully in meetings, not more honestly, just more aware. Words were weighed now, not for beauty, but for what they might one day be remembered for. The land was returned to Morẹ nikẹ, but people admired Morẹ nikẹ's courage, some with admiration, some with fear, some with resentment, because courage, when revealed, exposes everyone else's compromises. Children whispered about her when she passed. Women paused their conversations. Men avoided her eyes, unsure whether respect or guilt should speak first. She did not explain herself. She had already said enough. The village learned its most uncomfortable lesson, slowly. Power does not need to be defeated to be diminished. Sometimes, it only needs to be seen clearly. People began to understand that kneeling was not always respect, that silence was not always peace, that survival practiced too long could start to resemble consent. They still knelt when the king appeared. Custom does not collapse overnight. But something had changed in the way they did it. Heads bowed lower, not from reverence, but from thought. And sometimes, in the privacy of their homes, people spoke names they had once buried. Stories resurfaced. Questions were asked in hushed voices. The past loosened its grip on secrecy. The king ruled until the end of his days. He was remembered as strong, as stable, as traditional, but never again as unquestioned. Because one woman had stood long enough to teach a village something power never intended to explain. Authority thrives on forgetting, but dignity survives on memory. And once a people learn the difference, they never kneel the same way again. And that's all thanks to Morẹ nikẹ,